Yo, we just got version 3.1 and we continue getting 2 new Archon quests. This will be my review on just Act 3 with my review on Act 4 coming shortly after, so feel free to subscribe for my future videos. I liked Act 3 overall as it had a good balance between having character moments and introducing more stakes in the story. So yeah, let's get into my thoughts on Sumeru's Archon quest Act 3, Dreams, Emptiness, Deception. We pick up a few days after the Sabzeru Samsara, where Nahida has still been resting after using a lot of her power to save Dunyarzad. She still needs to possess Catherine in order to communicate with us, which goes to further show how she can't manifest herself physically in this world. She needs to connect to someone on the Akasha network. It makes me a bit sad because we're further reminded of the disconnect between Sumeru and its Dendro Archon, where Nahida can only manifest herself in dreams, and dreams are not respected in Sumeru. I think her dream of being in the center while people around her are happy and dancing is pretty fitting because it's something I think a young child would dream about. I think this will definitely happen at some point, maybe in the next update's Archon quests, which would be the conclusion. With both Dunyarzad's and Collei's Elazar both being referenced again, I think it's further evidence that we will eventually find a cure for Elazar, through something happening to the Irminsul, whether it's cured, destroyed, or even replaced. I think with how much these two are affected by the illness, it's got to be cured somehow for them to keep living. Especially because the writers in the previous act decided to have Dunyarzad be saved, so it doesn't make sense to me if she ends up dying to Elazar anyways. Also, finding a cure for Elazar can be a big booster for Kusanali's reputation in Sumeru. Now, we try to plan how to stop whatever the sages are doing, and we decide to use Setaria, an assistant to the Grand Sage. It turns out that she has internal conflict where, despite being a genius from the desert, she's become complacent after being accepted into the academia, going along with the sage's plans even though she doesn't really support them. She feels guilty for this, yet chooses to ignore these problems because of the resources she gets at the academia. And so, we draw out her inner conflict to get her to side against the sages, trying to get their plans from her. We didn't really get foreshadowing at all about this side of her character. In fact, when we saw her at the Grand Bazaar during the Sabzerus festival, she was just berating Nilou, and there was no indication of any internal conflict. I suppose her darker skin tone does suggest that she may be from the desert area, so there's that. But yeah, this character development of Setaria was kind of surprising, but I think it was a welcome one. It gives good credence that not everyone at the academia supports the sages, which I think is good overall. It adds more dimension to the academia. I thought that the analogy that Nahida uses to describe Setaria's situation is rather ironic. Nahida summarizes Setaria as being a bright star that doesn't like the scorching sun, represented as the academia, and that maybe Setaria would be better off being a bright light for the people in the desert, like how a moon shines during the night. Which I find ironic because Nahida describes herself negatively as being the moon, where she finds herself unable to fill the shoes of being the sun, represented by Rukkhadevata. So I wonder if maybe Nahida will eventually accept herself as a moon, where she's still valuable by being a beacon of light in people's dark times, like in people's nightmares, for example. I also found it interesting that the Scarlet King's revival is just a misinformation campaign from the academia. What purpose do they have for starting fake news? What exactly do they gain from people believing in the Scarlet King again? Since it's a campaign, I assume there's some experiment they're conducting. The only thing I can think of right now is that I guess they want more people to seek out divine knowledge capsules and see how it turns out for people. Like how the leader of Al-Akmar had become crazed from using one, and so they want to research exactly what happens to people's minds after using a divine knowledge capsule? I'm not sure, but I'm very interested in knowing why. Anyways, the first big scene that we get is falling into the trap of the number 2 Fatui Harbinger, the Doctor Dottore. His appearance here looks like the segment in the prime of his life shown from the Fatui interlude trailer. He spied on Setaria, so now she's been captured. Dottore says he succeeded in an experiment that allows him to modify Akasha terminals to make people have certain hallucinations, which can allow him to control their minds. This is pretty scary because this kind of power is on par with what Nahida is able to do, so Dottore essentially is able to use the power of a god. It does fit in line with what we know of his character so far, but it's still frightening to see his actions. His timely appearance in Sumeru is interesting too. I think this likely confirms the cause of the ominous feeling in Sumeru that Libin had mentioned. Even the sages are cautious of Dottore since Dottore was previously exiled from the academia due to his practices. I wonder exactly how much the sages are working with Dottore since they are wary of him as Setaria stated earlier. I imagine they must be really desperate with their plan that they'd be willing to negotiate with Dottore. I also think it's pretty clear from a narrative perspective that Dottore will come out on top, that he's the one manipulating the sages if anything. Even the traveler sensed Dottore's danger level and fled from the scene. Yo, the traveler better upgrade their dual blade if they want a shot at beating Dottore. So yeah, when is that gonna happen? I also really liked the cutscene's ending because of Dottore's curiosity when finding out Nahida's identity as the God of Wisdom, which makes me believe that he's very familiar with gods, as he wasn't at all afraid. Like, he was happy to see that the God of Wisdom is in front of him. Overall, this was a strong introduction for Dottore in the game, and establishes his threatening presence. I also thought his English voice actor, Mick Wingert, did a fantastic job voicing Dottore as well. We meet up with Collei in Garndavaville, where she tells us her Elazar has been progressing faster. This makes me double down on us curing Elazar soon. There's just no way we don't cure it at this point. We head to Party's Dehya after Collei tells us that Tighnari has rushed over there. Nahida successfully fled from Dottore and confirms that he's aware of her existence and that he can capture her consciousness, which again is another scary thing that Dottore is capable of. We meet Hypatia again, who thinks she's successfully connected her consciousness to the divine. I think Nahida is sus of this primarily because Hypatia shouldn't have been able to reach Paripurna life so quickly, as ascending past Satyavada life is something that many people take a lifetime to do. So something artificial must have been involved, and that factor is yet another Harbinger, the Balladeer Scaramouche himself. His flashback tells us a great amount about his character. Essentially, his life has been a series of 3 betrayals. First is his creator A, who had no use for a weak puppet. 2, his friend who he considered family, yet betrayed him because of fear. And lastly, a young child whose unfortunate death leaves Scaramouche with an everlasting hatred for the mortality and emotions of humans. At this point, his dreams have been crushed. He tries to feel empty inside and looks to get rid of his emotions in order to become a god with a gnosis. I think his backstory here is pretty well summarized by the title of this act, where his dreams felt crushed, leading to emptiness, and colluding with deception to reach his goals. If anything, this sets him up for a character arc where I imagine that he'll eventually realize the value of human emotions, because without them he wouldn't exist. I fully expect him to be a playable character soon. Our next cutscene is pretty interesting too because we swap consciousnesses with Nahida after Catherine is stabbed, which makes me wonder how much pain Nahida feels when her host is hurt. Could she have died if she didn't get out of Catherine's mind? I assume that she would have been in great danger. While in Nahida's body, we see the sanctuary of Surasthana for the first time, where it makes all the more sense now why Nahida can't manifest herself physically, because her physical body is literally being contained in the sanctuary. I think the sages are containing her to utilize her power somehow. I personally still think the sages want to revive Rukkhadevata, and I saw a theory out there that people think Nahida was Rukkhadevata, so maybe the sages are trying to use Nahida's body as a core to revive Rukkhadevata? And maybe them trying to turn Scaramouche into a god is related to this? Like maybe if the experiment to turn Scaramouche into a god is successful, then that could tell them that it should be possible to revive Rukkhadevata? It is one of Tighnari's questions later where he wonders about the connection between creating a new god and the revival of Irminsul. Also, this cutscene confirms that Scaramouche is currently in the academia, because the room leading up to him is the same room in the academia where we're currently unable to open an elevator to. So I imagine that when we fight Scaramouche in a future update, that the battle will take place in this area above the academia. New weekly boss? After the traveler gets back in their own body after Tighnari helped them escape, Tighnari tells us Dottore has trapped Nahida's consciousness, so again, Dottore is a big threat. I imagine that Nahida still isn't at full power, But still, this pretty much takes her out of the Archon quests for now. I haven't played through Act 4 yet. I plan to do that after releasing this video, but I wouldn't expect to see Nahida again until at least Act 5 in the next update. I also think it's really cool how we inform Tighnari of all of this info, where he becomes aware that Nahida is the Dendro Archon. It reminds me of the Mondstadt Archon quests, where Jean and Diluc knew about Venti being Barbados. We were all actively working together with Venti to help Dvalin, which I thought was a great dynamic, where our characters are all working with each other and the Archon. I liked those character interactions a lot. No one really knew about Zhongli in Liya's Archon quest, and A was pretty absent from most of Inazuma's Archon quest. So it's refreshing here in Sumeru's Archon quests that more characters are aware of Nahida, and I hope we get more interactions between them. So Nahida's parting words brings us to the desert area, the last area of the act. I'm a little sad that Tighnari wasn't able to join us as he needs to help out Hypatia. With the great character interactions we get in the desert, it would have been fun to see how Tighnari interacts with them, but maybe the writers thought that we had enough characters in the desert, so I can understand why they chose to leave Tighnari out of this last part. We're joined by the rational Alhaitham, who's been interested in us more. Cyno appears for the first time in game and sees us as threats, especially Alhaitham. They have a really cool fight before some dialogue, and if it weren't for Dehya, we would have had more fighting, but I guess Dehya was just trying to save Hoyoverse's budget for the future, so oh well. I have to say, while I've been focused on the Archon quest, I do really like the desert area so far and I'm super excited to explore it. I haven't had much time to fully explore the rainforest of Sumeru, including having not finished the Aranara world quest, but I'm still super excited to explore all of Sumeru eventually. Seeing this desert area also makes me wish we had a movement mechanic like shield surfing from Breath of the Wild, since I think that would add a great amount of fun to the desert and Genshin in general, but maybe that's a topic for another day. Anyways, Candace also appears to defuse the situation, and we go into a room in Aaru Village, full of awkward tension. I really like the dynamic and tension between Cyno and Alhaitham, where Cyno throws constant threats at Alhaitham and Alhaitham is just rationally nonchalant about it. I really like Cyno's serious demeanor, since it feels natural to what we saw of his character in the manga when he came to help seal Collei's Archon residue. It's also established that both Cyno and Alhaitham are distrusted by the sages, so there's a setup there for an eventual confrontation between them, I think. Cyno will definitely pass judgment onto the sages, and Alhaitham will likely just get more info about divine knowledge. The characters are all hyping up the sages project because literally no one is getting information about it. I also like Dehya's personality, where she just wanted to chill in Aaru Village but gets ticked off between two nerds fighting. And that she also finds their conversations just boring in general, so. Candace is pretty cool too, since she gives off a warm, motherly, caring personality, yet is ready to be serious when time calls for it. We also learn some lore about the village keepers in Aaru Village, where the village is home to many exiled scholars. The people didn't used to like these scholars, but came around to them when one of the scholars helped keep the village buildings in place during a great earthquake. It's implied that this was Nahida's doing, so she's been helping out even the people in the desert area. Again, I think Nahida is trying her best to be a good Archon, and yet she still feels imposter syndrome. It's an interesting note that the earthquake that hit Aaru Village is stated to be the strongest earthquake in living memory, so I wonder exactly what caused it in Aaru Village specifically, and if it has any relevance to the overarching story. Lastly, we inform Cyno about Nahida's situation, and it's cool that, like Tighnari, Cyno is now aware of Nahida and the Dendro Archon, and is slowly also recognizing Kusanali. So, we're making slow progress towards all of Sumeru recognizing Kusanali. I think that wraps up my general thoughts on this act. We are set up for finding Izak's grandpa to start the next act, so yeah, I'll likely cover that in the next video. Overall, I thought this was a pretty solid act. It was more of a setup act, but the setup was pretty good. We have conflict forming within the academia, as seen with Setaria, Alhaitham, and Cyno. We also got introduced to the threatening and cunning ill Dottore, who I thought got established as a real legitimate threat. There's also Scaramouche's involvement in becoming a god, which is interesting because if the sages are helping him become a god, I wonder if Scaramouche is willingly accepting help from humans, given his hate towards them. I also wonder how Dottore plays into this, given his exiled status. Additionally, is Dottore involved with Scaramouche? I would think not, because the Fatui wants all the Gnosis, and Scaramouche needs the Electro-Gnosis for himself, so there are conflicting interests there. I personally predict that Dottore will end up with both the Dendro and Electro-Gnoses after Sumeru's Archon quest, as I see Scaramouche eventually realizing that he doesn't need a Gnosis, and will accept his human emotions. Dottore has trapped Nahida's consciousness, so I don't think we'll see her anytime soon. We'll likely see her again when we resolve whatever we need to do in the desert. And yeah, we had some fun interactions between Cyno, Alhaitham, Dehya, and Candace. I've been behind with my Collei and Tighnari videos, but do rest assured they're still on the way. I'm going to play through Act 4 right now and make another review video shortly after, so yeah. Thank you for watching this video. Feel free to subscribe for more content, and that's it for now. So till next time, take care.